as you were talking about employee engagement, like it's just a term that kind of like, you know, it has its own sort of, you know, I don't know, it has its own sort of, you know,
It becomes a buzzword.
Yeah,
It becomes
it's a buzzword. It means nothing.
Yeah.
But then if you think about it, to your point, it's about people being engaged. Well, what does it take for them to be engaged? It takes their attention. They have to have some connection. They have to have some purpose that's resonant with them for them to expend, you know, discretionary effort in pursuit of this goal. And it's just, I mean, you know, the simplest things or the most profound things are always kind of simple. And like, I just had such a light bulb moment when you were talking about like, you have to be entertaining is obviously a caricature of it, or that's not what we're saying, but being engaged or getting people engaged means you have their sort of unbridled attention. When your kids are flipping through TikTok, they're zoned in on TikTok, or they're zoned in on whatever game they're playing. And there's this broader thing that I've kind of noticed that like there's this, you know, the business world is this weird kind of non-world where like you can't be human, or you think, right? These are all these fallacies that kind of affect us. You can't be human. You have to sort of trim this piece of yourself out of the equation. It leads to inauthenticity, and it leads to, I think, a lot of engagements, so to speak, with our people that aren't resonant with them because they can sniff out the inauthenticity. Like along with all this attention, you know, economy rising, there's also this commensurate sort of increase in being able to sniff out inauthenticity. Where do you see, again, this is going to be a broad brushstroke, and I'm sure we can talk about this particular question for the next hour, but where do you see the root of problems in leadership corporately? You know, you've worked with a lot of really big companies. You know, Fortune 100 companies are massive. Everybody knows about them. Those are almost the, you know, they're almost the end of the line in terms of what a business can sort of like Frankenstein into. And they are in those environments, I think, a lot of the worst of business sort of lives out. Where do you see kind of people's humanity kind of dissipating away, or what do you see at the root of the leadership leakage that's existing in these massive organizations, or even at small organizations?
Yeah, great question. And yeah, we could spend hours talking about this one. So for me, as I think about this, and, you know, it's funny because before we go there, I just want to pull a little bit more on your thread around engagement, because, you know, if you think about engagement outside of the buzzword of employee engagement, if you think about where do we use the word engaged or engagement, it's around marriage, right? If we're not, that's pretty much where you use it. And you think if I was to ask someone to marry me, what is it I'm really asking? I'm asking them to spend the rest of their life with me. That is, I'm willing to invest time in effort and focus on them and them with me. And so what's interesting, if we translate that from the world of marriage to the world of, let's say, organizational behavior, as leaders, if we're not willing to invest in the people and care about them, and also invest in being intentional about how do we keep them engaged and keep that spark alive, as opposed to said, well, I said I love you the day we hired you. What do you mean I need to say it again? That wouldn't work in your marriage. It's not going to work for your employees.
Right.
So it's the sense of, what are you constantly doing to engage, to invest in bringing that spark? And again, that's where I think the performing arts are all about, the spark. And, you know, we talk about leaders wanting to be inspiring. Well, what inspires people, and how do you find out? Maybe you should ask them. So anyway, I wanted to kind of pull on that thread first a little bit more, because I think it's a useful thing to think about. Because again, it's easy to hang out in the land of buzzwords and jargon, and this becomes neutral and antiseptic, which is not very useful. So let's go on to your bigger, bolder question around what gets in the way. So yeah, the stats are shocking around effective leadership. That is, they're poor. So, and I've seen, there's a lot of meta studies, but I'll just share a few things that I've seen recently. So less than half of global professionals trust their employer. Only 40, this comes from an Ernst & Young study. 49% of people trust their employers. When it comes to communication, only 31% of people believe their leaders communicate well. And an overall leadership effectiveness, only 23% of people believe their leaders lead well. And you think, oh my gosh, that's such a low number. Why? Why is it so bad? Well, I think there's a couple of things that are baked into the system that perpetuate. And these numbers have been low, flat like this for a long, like decades.
Right.
So why is that? There's a couple reasons. And number one they're all connected together. It's kind of a cauldron. We can kind of put all these things into the cauldron, and they include fear, power, control, and hierarchy. Because I can guarantee you, if only 23% of people believe their leaders lead well, you've got 77% of leaders who are not leading well. How many of us are comfortable going to those leaders who are being poor role models?
Yeah, right.
Are you comfortable going and saying, hey, I think you could do a better job? Most leaders don't create a safe environment for people to speak their mind. Now, on an anonymous survey to Ernst & Young or somebody else, you'll share that because you know it's anonymous. However, in the soup of where we work, forget about it. And so what ends up happening is you have leaders who have the power, and frankly, what is in their interest to basically reduce their own status, right? Because you think about hierarchy and power, you have to be willing to go lower status to say, hey, yeah, I know I'm the leader, but we're all equal here. Now, what's fascinating is our world, because of technology, because of transparency, because of changing expectations and human conditions, we're expecting a flatter world. Yet so many people, when they get into the leadership role, they start automatically, unconsciously, just playing out the behaviors of, and it may go back to childhood, it may go back to, because I'm your dad, that's why you do these things, right? That classic, basic power struggle. Someone's in charge and someone basically has the final say, right? And so what's challenging for a lot of leaders is they still think in binary. They're like, wow, well, if I don't have the final say, this becomes a free-for-all.
Right.
Or this means that we're never going to get anything done. Well, you've just totally gone into this very old world binary. It's either this way or that way, versus what I call the new school or facilitative mindset of a leader. It's much more a both and. Well, what if you created a world? Yes, there's still hierarchy, and yes, there are decisions that have to be made because we have a business to run. But rather than thinking that everybody has a vote in terms of what we're doing, what if everybody has a voice and we value and care about that voice? And if we choose to go in a different direction from that voice, we still respect the voice and the person and value the individual and give them context as to why we're going there,
right?
So that they come along. Because it's amazing how, and just think about your own experience, Nick, and I can think of my own, how if people have the rationale and they're treated with a baseline level of caring and respect, they'll be willing to disagree and yet go along. But that takes more time up front.